Imagine waking up one day and realizing you never really had a childhood. Not because you cannot remember it, not because there were no birthdays or photographs or school days, but because somewhere between learning to tie your shoes and learning to swallow your tears, you became responsible for things that were never meant to fit inside small hands. You were the quiet one, the mature one, the child who didn't need to be told twice. While others were busy discovering the world through scraped knees and impulsive laughter, you were studying something far more complex, the emotional weather of the house. You could feel tension before it was spoken. You could sense disappointment before it was expressed. You knew instinctively when to stay silent, when to help, when to disappear. And people praised you for it. "You're so grown up. You're my little helper. I don't know what I'd do without you." Each compliment felt like sunlight. You stood taller. You felt special, chosen, needed. But here is the paradox no one warned you about. When a child becomes the adult, something essential is quietly taken from them. And the tragedy is that it often looks like strength. What happens to a child who learns that love must be earned through usefulness? What happens to a nervous system that never experiences true safety, only conditional stability? What happens when survival replaces play? Growing up too fast rarely feels traumatic in the moment. It feels necessary, logical, even noble. Maybe there was a sick parent. Maybe there was emotional chaos. Maybe there was poverty, conflict, addiction, or simply absence. Whatever the reason, you adapted. You learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. You monitored moods like a scientist studying volatile chemicals. You became hyper-aware, hyper-responsible, hyper-capable. You stopped asking for help because you could see there was no one stable enough to give it. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, you stopped being a child. A child is supposed to experiment with boundaries, to fail dramatically, to cry loudly and trust that someone will come. A child is meant to believe that the world is held together by adults, that there is a larger structure protecting them from collapse. But what if you were the structure? What if you believed, even unconsciously, that if you relaxed, everything would fall apart? So you didn't relax. You carried. You carried secrets that weren't yours to keep. You carried siblings on your hip and emotional burdens in your chest. You carried the invisible rule that your needs were negotiable, but everyone else's were urgent. You became fluent in other people's emotions and illiterate in your own. And here lies the great question. If your identity was built on being needed, who are you when no one needs you? Silence feels unsettling. Rest feels undeserved. Joy feels slightly dangerous. Even as an adult, you may find yourself restless in calm environments, unconsciously searching for a problem to solve, a fire to put out, a person to rescue, because chaos feels familiar and familiarity feels like home. But why does this happen? Why does a child's early adaptation become an adult's invisible cage? To understand that, you have to look beneath the surface behavior and into the architecture of the psyche. Psychologically, a child who grows up too fast often experiences what is known as parentification. This is not always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it is emotional. You became the confidant, the mediator, the peacekeeper. You absorbed adult concerns long before your brain was ready to process them. Developmentally, the human brain is designed for stages. Play builds creativity. Dependence builds trust. Emotional expression builds regulation. When these stages are interrupted, the child does not stop developing. Instead, they skip ahead in one area and lag behind in another. You may have developed extraordinary competence, but your nervous system may have remained in a subtle state of hypervigilance, always scanning, always anticipating, always preparing for impact. Carl Jung once suggested that what we do not live consciously will manifest in our lives as fate. When you are forced to be strong too early, vulnerability does not disappear. It retreats into the shadow. It waits. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about becoming who you are, but what if who you became was shaped primarily by survival? What if your personality is not entirely an expression of your authentic self, but a carefully constructed armor? Armor is heavy. It protects, yes, but it also restricts movement. It makes intimacy complicated, because intimacy requires softness, and softness once felt unsafe. As a child, perhaps you concluded silently, "If I am useful, I will be loved. If I am strong, I will not be a burden. If I have no needs, I cannot be rejected." These beliefs are rarely spoken. They are encoded in the nervous system. They become automatic. They shape choices without announcing themselves. You may choose partners who need saving, friends who rely heavily on you, careers that demand constant responsibility. And when someone tries to take care of you, you feel uncomfortable, suspicious, almost irritated. Why? Because dependence once felt dangerous. It felt like standing on thin ice. Arthur Schopenhauer spoke of the human condition as one driven by will and suffering. For the child who grows up too fast, suffering becomes intertwined with identity. Struggle feels meaningful, ease feels empty. And so you chase achievement, you overperform, you become the reliable one at work, the emotionally stable one in relationships, the one who has it together. But beneath that composure, there is often exhaustion, a quiet, unnamed grief. Grief for the tantrums you never threw, for the mistakes you never made, for the reckless freedom you never experienced. The hidden problem is not your strength. It is the belief that strength is the only acceptable state. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free, that we must choose ourselves. But how do you choose yourself when your early identity was shaped primarily by necessity rather than desire? How do you discover what you want when you were trained to focus on what others need? Viktor Frankl wrote that meaning is found in how we respond to suffering. And indeed, your early responsibility may have given you depth, empathy, resilience. But meaning becomes distorted when it is tied exclusively to sacrifice. The deeper consequence is this: you may not know how to exist without proving your worth. Neurologically, chronic stress in childhood can wire the brain for heightened alertness. The amygdala becomes sensitive. The body prepares for threat even in safe environments. This can manifest as anxiety, perfectionism, difficulty relaxing. Cognitively, you may develop biases that reinforce your role. Confirmation bias ensures you notice evidence that you must handle everything yourself. The spotlight effect makes you overestimate how much others depend on you. The sunk cost fallacy keeps you invested in roles that exhaust you because you have already given so much. Culturally, society often glorifies early maturity, the hard-working child, the responsible teenager, the old soul. We rarely ask what that child had to sacrifice to earn those labels. And so the pattern continues unnoticed. You become the adult who struggles to ask for help,
the partner who overfunctions, the friend who listens but rarely shares, the professional who burns out quietly. You might feel strangely empty when everything is stable, as if without crisis you have no role, no script. This is the unseen consequence. The child who grew up too fast often builds a life around managing instability, even if that instability is subtle. You may unconsciously recreate familiar dynamics because they validate your identity. But here is where urgency enters. If your worth is tied to being needed, you will attract neediness. If your identity is built on self-sacrifice, you will neglect yourself. If your nervous system equates chaos with normalcy,